He'd been waiting for 47 minutes, 47 minutes meaningless to someone who'd lived 3 centuries. But tonight, on Christmas Eve in this small cafe on Maple Street, every second felt like an eternity. The Vampire King sat perfectly still, white hair falling past his shoulders, pale fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. Outside the fogged window, Christmas lights blinked red and gold through the falling snow. Inside, people whispered, shooting him pitying glances. The couple at the next table leaned in close. Poor guy. Think he got stood up on his blind date. He should have left. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to return to the shadows where a vampire king belonged. In 300 years, Lucius had never waited for anyone. Not once. Waiting meant weakness. Hesitation meant death. Love meant loss. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, something held him in that chair. Break his own rules. The answer would change everything. The barista, a kid with a nose ring and kind eyes, brought him a second coffee free of charge. The pity gesture almost made Lucius laugh, if only they knew what he really was. What waited beneath this human facade. Around him, the cafe hummed with warmth. Families crowded around mismatched tables. The air smelled of cinnamon and wet wool. Laughter spilled from a birthday celebration in the corner. Life in all its messy, mortal glory. And here sat the Vampire King, alone again. Lucius checked his antique pocket watch for the 12th time. 7:53 p.m. No messages, only a photo from Margaret, his witch friend, who'd set up this blind date, a woman with tired eyes and calloused hands. Beside her, a small boy with a gap-toothed smile. "She's not your usual type," Margaret had said over lunch last week, sliding the photo across the table. "She's a poor, single mom working herself to the bone, but she's kind. And Lucius, you need something good right now, something real." He'd almost refused. The vampire kingdom was in chaos, rebels threatening his throne, questioning his new philosophy that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be monsters. He had councils to attend, enemies to crush, an entire world of darkness to control. But the pity in Margaret's eyes had stopped him. That and the bone-deep loneliness that had followed him through 3 centuries of Christmas Eves. Lucius remembered the last woman he'd loved, 1847. Her name had been Catherine. "You never wait." She'd whispered the night she left him. "Not for me, not for us. You're always 10 steps ahead, always calculating your next move. I'm tired of chasing you, Lucius. I'm tired of being alone with someone who's always here, but never really present." He hadn't cried. Vampires didn't cry. He'd watched her walk away and told himself it was better this way, safer. Love made you vulnerable, and vulnerability got you killed. But now, sitting in this cafe on Christmas Eve, surrounded by strangers, he wondered if she'd been right. If maybe the real death wasn't at the end of a wooden stake, it was this endless echoing emptiness that no amount of power could fill. His phone buzzed. "Margaret, give her a chance. Real connection breaks curses you didn't even know you had." Lucius stared at the message. Curses. Yes, he knew about those. The curse of immortality, the curse of watching everyone you loved turn to dust, the curse of forgetting what it felt like to genuinely care about another person's fleeting existence. The couple at the next table kissed. The birthday girl blew out her candles. Outside, carolers passed by, their voices muffled through the glass, and the Vampire King waited. At 7:54, he made a decision. He would wait until 8:00, exactly 60 minutes. Then he'd leave and never speak of this blind date again. It was logical, reasonable, the kind of boundary a man, even an immortal one, should maintain. He wrapped his hands around the lukewarm coffee cup, letting the mundane gesture anchor him to this human moment. Maybe that was what he needed. Not a grand romance, but the simple act of showing up, of trying. The door chimed. Cold air rushed in carrying snow and the scent of hospitals, antiseptic and exhaustion, and something else. Something that made his vampire instincts sharpen. Blood, weak blood laced with stress hormones. A woman stumbled through the doorway, soaked to the bone. Her old coat dripped puddles onto the floor. Short black hair stuck to her forehead. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked like she'd been running, or crying, or both. She scanned the cafe frantically, her gaze landing on him, and stopped for a heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Then she crossed the room in quick, unsteady steps, words tumbling out before she even reached the table. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm Elise, my son. He was sick. I couldn't leave the hospital. My phone died." She stopped, finally seeing him, clearly seeing the 2 coffee cups, the crumpled napkins, the way he'd clearly been waiting. Her voice dropped to a whisper, raw, with something that sounded like wonder. "You waited. Why would you wait?" And Lucius, who had 300 years of smooth answers, found himself speechless, because he didn't know why. He only knew that for the first time in centuries, the waiting had meant something. What made an immortal king? Lucius stood and immediately realized his mistake. At his full height, he towered over the poor single mom, aristocratic, otherworldly, completely out of place in this neighborhood cafe. The kind of man who belonged in marble halls, not surrounded by plastic chairs and linoleum floors. But Elise didn't flinch. She just looked up at him with those exhausted eyes and repeated, "Why did you wait?" The question felt dangerous, like if he answered honestly, he might crack open something he'd spent centuries keeping locked away. "I understand what it's like," he said carefully, "to be late for your own life." Her shoulders sagged. Relief, or maybe something deeper. She slid into the chair across from him, and a barista, the same kid who'd brought the pity coffee, rushed over with a towel. Elise thanked him with the kind of gratitude people reserve for genuine kindness in the middle of crisis. She wiped her face. Her hands were rough-scarred from work, hands that had scrubbed and cleaned and fought for every small mercy. "Jaime, my son, he had a fever of 103, she said. "I was at the ER for 4 hours. I tried to text, but the signal was terrible, and then my phone died, and she stopped herself. I'm making excuses. I'm sorry. I was late. This was supposed to be. Margaret said you were. I don't even know what this blind date is supposed to be." "A date," Lucius said, and the word felt foreign in his mouth. "I think it's supposed to be a date." A small, broken laugh escaped her. "Some Christmas Eve date. I'm soaking wet and I smell like hospital." "You smell," he said truthfully, "like someone who puts their child first. There's no shame in that." Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back quickly, like someone who'd learned not to cry in public, or maybe who'd cried so much that the tears had simply run out. The Vampire King felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Not hunger, not the predatory instinct that usually accompanied the scent of vulnerable humans. Something else entirely. Empathy. The thing he'd been trying to teach his vampire followers. The thing that had nearly cost him his throne. The radical idea that maybe, just maybe, mortals weren't merely food or pawns, but people worth understanding. "Tell me about Jaime," he said, and watched her transform. The exhaustion didn't leave her face, but light entered her eyes. "He's 7, smart as hell, draws these elaborate pictures of dragons and spaceships. He was so excited when I told him I had a friend meeting me on Christmas Eve. He helped me pick out this shirt." She gestured to the plain blue blouse beneath her soaked coat, now wrinkled and stained. He said, "Blue makes me look brave." He's right. He's the brave one. His birth mother left him 3 years ago, just walked away when things got hard. When the medical bills started piling up, I was their neighbor, and one day I found him sitting in the hallway, waiting for someone who was never coming back. The story came out in pieces, how Elise had been a housemaid for Jaime's family, How she'd watched the mother grow distant, distracted, drowning in prescription pills and resentment. How she'd promised a 7-year-old boy that she wouldn't leave him even though she barely made enough to feed herself. "The adoption went through last year," she said. "Margaret handled it pro bono because she's an angel, but the medical debt. Jamie has this condition they can't quite diagnose. Mystery illness, they call it. Fevers that come and go. Fatigue. He's been in and out of specialists for 2 years." Lucius listened, and in the spaces between her words he heard the unspoken truth. She was drowning, working herself to the bone, sacrificing every dream, every moment of peace for a child who wasn't even biologically hers. And she did it without complaint, without asking for credit, without expecting anything in return. It was the most foreign concept the Vampire King had ever encountered. "What about you?" Elise asked suddenly. "Margaret said you're between jobs." The lie Margaret had told because a centuries-old Vampire King didn't make for good dating profiles. "Something like that," Lucius said. "I'm in a transitional period, questioning some of my life choices. Like what he thought of the vampire councils, the rebels who claimed he'd gone soft, the centuries of hunting and killing and ruling through fear. The lover who'd told him he never waited, never stayed, never let anyone truly in. Like whether power is worth the loneliness," he said quietly. "Whether winning means anything if you have no one to share it with." Elise studied him with those tired, knowing eyes. "Margaret said you needed someone real, someone who wouldn't let you hide behind whatever walls you've built, and you needed someone who would wait, even when you're late, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The barista appeared again. "You folks want to order?" Elise glanced at the menu, and Lucius watched her eyes skip over everything, landing on the cheapest sandwich. The poor single mom was about to order when he interrupted. "Get whatever you want, please. I insist. I don't need. I know you don't need it, but maybe you want it. When's the last time you ordered exactly what you wanted?" The question landed like a blow. She stared at the menu, and he could see her warring with herself, pride against hunger, independence against the simple human desire to be cared for. "The grilled chicken," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper, "with the side salad and the hot chocolate with extra whipped cream." Lucius ordered the same, even though he hadn't eaten solid food in decades. He'd choke it down if he had to. This moment mattered more than his comfort. While they waited for the food, Elise's phone buzzed. She answered, and her entire face softened. "Hey, sweetheart. Yes, I'm okay. I'm having dinner with my friend. His name is Lucius." A pause, then a small laugh. "Yes, he's nice. Very nice." Another pause. Longer this time. Elise's eyes grew wet again. "I love you too, so much. Take your medicine and drink water. I'll be home soon." She hung up and looked at Lucius. "He wanted to make sure you're good enough for me. A 7-year-old running quality control on my Christmas Eve blind date. Smart kid. What's the verdict?" he said. "Anyone who waits in the snow is probably a keeper." The words hung between them, fragile and impossibly heavy. The Vampire King thought of all the reasons he should walk away. The Vampire Kingdom, the rebels hunting him, the fact that he could accidentally kill her with a moment of lost control, the reality that she would age and die while he remained frozen in time. But he also thought of Jamie's question, "Is he nice?" and Elise's answer, "Very nice." When's the last time someone had called him nice? When's the last time he'd tried to be? "Can I ask you something?" Elise said, "and I want the honest answer, not the polite one." "Of course. Why did you really wait tonight? You don't know me. I was late. I ruined the whole blind date. You had every reason to leave. So why stay?" Lucius looked at her, this tired, brave woman who'd shown up even when everything in her life was falling apart, who'd apologized for being late to save her son's life, Who ordered the cheapest sandwich even though she was starving? Because, he said slowly, someone once told me I never wait for anything, that I'm always calculating my next move, always 10 steps ahead, never present. And I realized she was right. I've spent centuries moving too fast to actually live. Maybe tonight was my chance to prove I could slow down, that I could show up, that I could be present. Elise reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding, impossibly human. "Thank you," she whispered, "for waiting." And Lucius, who had ruled kingdoms and commanded armies and lived through the rise and fall of empires, felt something he hadn't felt in 300 years, hope. But waiting was only the beginning. What happened when the Vampire King followed her home would change both their worlds forever. They ate slowly, the food arrived. And the poor single mom took her first bite of the grilled chicken like it was a luxury she'd forgotten existed. Lucius forced down his own meal, grateful that centuries of self-control made him an expert at pretending to be human. Between bites, they talked. Real talk, not the surface-level small talk of blind dates, but the kind of conversation that happens when two lonely people recognize each other across a crowded room. She told him about her dreams of being an artist, how she'd had a scholarship once before her parents died and left her with nothing, how she taught herself to survive on minimum wage and pure stubbornness. He told her, carefully editing the supernatural details about growing up in a world where power meant everything and vulnerability meant death, about learning too late that the things you conquer never fill the spaces inside you. "Margaret thinks you need to learn empathy," Elise said, smiling slightly. "What do you think?" "I think," Lucius said, "that she's right. I've spent my whole life separate, above, looking down on everything instead of being part of it. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of being alone." The honesty surprised them both. Elise squeezed his hand. "You don't have to be." When they finished eating, she checked her phone again. Another text from Jaime. "Mom, can he come over? We were going to make cookies, but I got too sick. Maybe he can help." Elise showed him the message, hesitant. "You don't have to. I know it's a lot. A sick kid and a tiny apartment and—" "I'd like to meet him," the Vampire King interrupted. "If that's okay." "Are you sure? It's not exactly glamorous. We live in the old part of town. The building smells like mildew and the heat only works half the time." "Elise," he said gently, "I didn't wait 47 minutes on Christmas Eve to walk away now." Her eyes filled with tears again. She blinked them back and nodded. They took bus number 47 through streets glazed with Christmas lights. The city looked magical through the fogged windows, all soft edges and golden glows. They sat at the back, thighs touching, not speaking. Sometimes silence was its own kind of conversation. Her building was exactly as she'd described, red brick crumbling at the corners. The hallway smelled of old cooking and damp walls. But when she unlocked the door to apartment 2B, warmth flooded out. The space was tiny. Kitchen connected to living room, a narrow hallway leading to 2 small bedrooms. But it was clean, loved. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated entirely with handmade ornaments, paper snowflakes, popsicle stick reindeer, stars cut from foil. And on the couch, wrapped in blankets, was Jaime, 7 years old, small for his age, black hair falling into eyes that were too big, too knowing, fever-flushed cheeks. But when he saw his mother, his whole face lit up. "Mom!" Elise rushed to him, pressing her hand to his forehead, adjusting his blankets. The tenderness in the gesture made Lucius's chest ache. Then Jaime looked past her, straight at Lucius. "You're the one who waited," the boy said, voice small. "Mom said you waited in the snow on Christmas Eve." Lucius crossed the room slowly, carefully aware that he was being evaluated by someone far more perceptive than his age suggested. He knelt beside the couch, bringing himself to Jaime's eye level. "I'm Lucius, and yes, I waited. Your mother is worth waiting for." Hamey studied him with unnerving intensity. Then, apparently satisfied, he smiled, revealing a gap where he'd lost a tooth. "I'm Hamey. Want to see my drawings?" He did. Hamey pulled out a battered sketchbook filled with intricate drawings, dragons with impossible anatomy, spaceships that defied physics, families holding hands under stars. "This one's my favorite," Hamey said, pointing to a picture of 3 figures. A woman, a small boy, and between them a tall figure with flowing hair and eyes that seemed to glow red off the page. The Vampire King froze. "When did you draw this?" "Last week. I dreamed about it. The Shadow King who saves people instead of hurting them." Hamey looked up, completely innocent. "That's you, right?" The room seemed to tilt. Elise was staring at the drawing, then at Lucius, confusion flickering across her face. "Just a coincidence," Lucius managed. "I have distinctive hair." But his hands were shaking. Hamey didn't seem to notice. He was already talking about cookies. "We were going to make chocolate chip, but I got too tired. Could we do it now? All 3 of us." Elise started to protest. It was late. Hamey needed rest, but Lucius interrupted. "I think we can manage if Hamey directs from the couch." And so they did. Elise found the ingredients. Lucius read the recipe. Hamey called out instructions with the authority of a seasoned chef, insisting they crack the eggs one-handed for luck. Lucius broke the first egg spectacularly wrong, yolk dripping down his fingers. Hamey's laugh was medicine in itself. Pure, delighted, completely unself-conscious. They mixed and measured. Elise got flour on her shirt. Butter stuck to Lucius's hands. The kitchen filled with the smell of sugar and vanilla. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the Vampire King understood what home meant. It wasn't a place. It was this flour-dusted chaos and a child's laughter. And a woman who kept glancing at him like she couldn't quite believe he was real. The cookies came out misshapen, burnt at the edges. Hamey declared them perfect. Lucius took a bite. They were too sweet, underbaked in the middle. The best thing he'd ever tasted. They sat together on the couch, Elise, Hamey, Lucius, eating imperfect cookies and watching the Christmas tree lights blink. Hamey leaned against his mother, eyelids drooping. "Can Lucius stay?" he asked sleepily. "For Christmas he doesn't have anywhere to go, right?" Elise looked at Lucius, apology in her eyes. "Hamey, I'm sure Lucius has plans." "I don't," Lucius said quietly. "I don't have anywhere else to be." Hamey's eyes filled with tears, the kind of pure emotional response only children can manage. "Really? You'd stay if your mother doesn't mind?" Elise's voice was thick. "I don't mind." Shiny threw his arms around Lucius's neck, fever hot and trusting. "Thank you. Mum needs someone. She pretends she's okay, but I know she's lonely. And now you're here, and maybe she won't be sad anymore." Lucius felt something crack inside him, some ancient armor he'd built around his heart. He hugged Hamey back carefully, aware of his supernatural strength, terrified of breaking this fragile, precious child. "I'll do my best," he whispered. They put Hamey to bed together. Elise tucked him in, while Lucius stood in the doorway watching. She kissed her son's forehead, brushed his hair back, whispered something that made him smile. In the hallway, she turned to Lucius. "Thank you for tonight, for waiting even though I was late, for all of this. Elise, I know it's fast. I know it's crazy, but Hamey's right. I am lonely. I've been lonely for so long, and I forgot what it felt like to have someone show up, really show up." Lucius cupped her face in his hands. "I waited 47 minutes. I'm not going anywhere now." But even as he said it, he felt the weight of everything unsaid. The truth he was hiding, the danger that followed him, the fact that he was a monster pretending to be a man. The poor single mum deserved the truth, but how do you tell someone that you're the thing their children have nightmares about? "There's something you should know," he started. And that's when the window exploded. Glass shattered inward. A figure landed in the living room, pale, inhuman eyes glowing red in the darkness. A vampire, one of the rebels, and behind him, 2 more. "Found you, my lord," the vampire hissed. "Hiding among the cattle! How pathetic!" Elise screamed. Jaime cried out from his bedroom, and the Vampire King felt his carefully constructed human mask shatter. His eyes turned red, his fangs extended. He stepped between the intruders and Elise, and when he spoke, his voice carried 3 centuries of authority. "Leave now, or I'll show you exactly how pathetic I can be." The lead vampire laughed. "You think we're afraid of you? You've gone soft, Lucius. The council sent us to remind you what happens to kings who forget their place." "What is he?" Elise whispered behind him. "Lucius, what's happening?" But there was no time to explain. The vampires attacked. The secret was out, but the real danger had just begun, and only the truth could save them now. The Vampire King moved faster than human eyes could follow. He caught the first vampire mid-lunge, slamming him into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The second one came from the right. Lucius ducked, spun, drove his elbow into the attacker's throat. But there were 3 of them, and he was trying not to destroy the poor single mom's apartment. Not to terrify her more than she already was. "Elise, get Jaime and lock yourselves in the bathroom," he commanded, never taking his eyes off the enemies circling him. She didn't move, frozen in shock, staring at him, at the monster he'd become. Red eyes, inhuman speed, the truth written all over his face. "Elise, please!" The third vampire lunged past him, going straight for her. Lucius's heart, the heart he'd thought was too dead to break, seized in his chest. He moved without thinking, intercepting the attacker inches from Elise's throat. They crashed into the Christmas tree, ornaments shattering, the handmade decorations crushed beneath supernatural violence. "You want to fight?" The vampire snarled in Lucius's face. "Then fight like what you are. Stop pretending to be human." "I'm not pretending," the Vampire King growled back. "I'm choosing." He threw the vampire across the room, but before he could follow up, a small voice cut through the chaos. "Mom!" Jaime stood in the hallway, tiny in his pajamas, staring at the destruction, at the monsters in his living room, at Lucius, eyes glowing red in the darkness. And the lead vampire smiled. "Well, well, what do we have here?" He moved toward Jaime with predatory grace. A child. How convenient. "Don't you dare!" Lucius started. The vampire's hand shot out, grabbing Jaime by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The boy gasped, small hands clawing uselessly at the supernatural grip. Everything in the Vampire King went cold, then hot, then into a rage he hadn't felt since the day his own family died centuries ago. "Put him down. Make me, my lord. Show these mortals what you really are. Show them how a Vampire King deals with—" He never finished the sentence because Jaime bit him. The vampire yelped, dropping the boy. Blood welled from the bite mark and then started to smoke. Actually, smoke like acid eating through flesh. "What the—" The vampire stared at Jaime in horror. "That's not possible. His blood, ancient vampire lineage." The second attacker breathed. "He's got the blood of the old ones. That's why he's sick. The power is killing him from the inside." The revelation hit Lucius like a physical blow. Jaime's mystery illness, the fevers, the exhaustion, the dreams of Shadow Kings. The boy wasn't fully human. He was caught between worlds, the vampire blood in his veins slowly destroying his mortal body. "He's dying," Elise whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The doctors said they couldn't figure it out, but it's not a disease, it's his blood." The lead vampire recovered from his shock, eyes narrowing. "Then he's valuable. The council would pay handsomely for a child with old blood. We could use him too." The Vampire King didn't let him finish. He moved with the full, terrifying speed of a Vampire King. No more holding back, no more pretending to be something he wasn't. He was a monster, and right now that's exactly what this family needed. He tore into the attackers with centuries of combat experience, broke bones, spilled blood, used every brutal technique he'd learned in his long, violent life. The apartment became a war zone. Furniture shattered, walls dented, the smell of vampire blood thick in the air. But he was outnumbered, and they were desperate. One of them got past his guard, lunging for Hamey again. Lucius threw himself between them, taking a set of claws to his chest that would have disemboweled the boy. He gasped, stumbling. The wound burned, silver-tipped claws designed to kill even immortals. "Lucius!" Elise's scream cut through the haze of pain. He fell to one knee. The vampires closed in, smelling victory, and then the poor single mom stepped forward. "Get away from him!" She was holding the cheap wooden crucifix from the Christmas tree. Her hands shook, her voice shook, but she placed herself between Lucius and the attackers, armed with nothing but a child's craft project and pure suicidal bravery. The vampires laughed. "What are you going to do with that human? We're not afraid of symbols." "Maybe not," Elise said. "But you should be afraid of a mother protecting her family." She threw holy water from the small bottle she kept by the door for blessing the apartment straight into the lead vampire's face. He screamed, skin blistering, stumbling backward. Hamey, fever-bright but determined, grabbed the garlic bulbs hanging in the kitchen. Decorative, but real. He threw them at the attackers with a 7-year-old's furious accuracy. "Leave my mom alone! Leave Lucius alone!" Two mortals, fragile, powerless, standing against supernatural predators. It should have been suicide, but it gave the Vampire King the seconds he needed. He forced himself upright, ignoring the silver burning through his chest. He grabbed the attackers one by one, using the last of his strength to throw them through the already broken window. They tumbled into the night, screaming curses. The lead vampire paused at the edge of the window, meeting Lucius's eyes. "This isn't over. The council knows where you are now. They know about the boy. They'll come for him." "Let them try," Lucius said, voice rough with pain. "I'll kill every single one of them." The vampire vanished into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by Lucius's labored breathing and Hamey's quiet sobbing. Then Elise was there, hands on his face, checking his wounds. "Oh, God. Oh, God, you're hurt. We need to—" "I'll heal," he managed. "Elise, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have. You're a vampire." "Yes, and Hamey has vampire blood." "It appears so. His father must have been. That's why he's dying. The blood is too strong for his human body." The Vampire King nodded, each movement agony. "But there's a way to save him. If he drinks vampire blood, pure vampire blood, it can stabilize the transition, make him a Dhampir. Half human, half vampire, he'll stop dying." "Your blood?" Elise said. "Yes." She looked at Hamey, who was watching them with those two knowing eyes, fever-flushed, dying by inches, her baby boy. Then she looked at Lucius, the monster who'd waited 47 minutes in the snow on Christmas Eve, who'd stayed for cookies and Christmas, who'd thrown himself between her child and death. "Do it," she whispered. Lucius cut his wrist, the blood welling dark and ancient. Hamey didn't hesitate. He drank, and Lucius watched the boy's color improve. The fever break, the pain ease from his small face. When it was done, Hamey looked up at him with eyes that glowed faintly red. "I feel better," he said, wonder in his voice. "I feel strong." Elise pulled him into her arms, sobbing, "My baby, my brave, beautiful baby." Over her shoulder, Hamey met Lucius's eyes. "You saved me like in my dream. The Shadow King who protects instead of hurts." Lucius couldn't speak. The wound in his chest was healing, but the one in his heart felt bigger than ever. Elise finally released Jaime, turning to Lucius. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You're a vampire. Yes, you've been lying to me since our blind date. Not about the important things, not about waiting, not about wanting to stay." She studied him for a long moment. Then she crossed the ruined living room and took his hand. "Margaret was right. You needed someone real, someone who wouldn't let you hide." "Elise, I'm terrified," she said honestly. "I'm terrified of what you are, of what Jaime is becoming, of the danger that's going to keep coming. But I'm more terrified of being alone again, of watching my son die, of never knowing what it feels like to be waited for. So, what are you saying?" She squeezed his hand. "I'm saying stay. Help us figure this out. Teach Jaime about his new abilities. Protect us from the council. And let me protect you too, because you saved my son's life tonight. You saved both our lives, and I don't care what you are, Lucius. I care about who you choose to be." The Vampire King pulled her close, breathing in the scent of hospitals and exhaustion and impossible courage. "I choose this. I choose you. Both of you." Jaime wedged himself between them, small arms wrapping around both their waists. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Lucius looked down at the boy, half vampire, half human, completely his. "Yes," he said, "I think it does." Outside, snow continued to fall on Christmas Eve. Christmas lights blinked in the windows, and in apartment 2B, 3 people who'd been alone found themselves suddenly, terrifyingly, not alone anymore. The danger wasn't over, but now they would face it together, and love would prove stronger than any curse. They spent the rest of Christmas Eve boarding up the broken window with cardboard and duct tape, cleaning up shattered ornaments. Each broken piece a small heartbreak, trying to salvage some semblance of normalcy from the wreckage of their lives. Jaime fell asleep on the couch. Color finally returned to his cheeks, breathing steady and strong. But his sleep was different now, deeper, stiller, with an otherworldly quality that came from the vampire blood coursing through his veins. Elise sat beside him, one hand resting on his small chest, like she needed to feel him breathing to believe he was okay, to believe this was real, and not some fever dream. The Vampire King stood at the window, watching the street below for any sign of more attackers. His chest wound had healed, leaving only a faint silver scar, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. The weight of what had happened, what he'd revealed, pressed down on him like a physical thing. "They'll come back," he said quietly into the darkness. "The council. They won't stop until they have Jaime, or until they destroy me for defying them, for choosing mortals over my own kind. Then we'll deal with it," the poor single mom said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "Together. You don't understand what you're agreeing to." He turned to face her, needing her to see the full truth. "These aren't normal enemies. They're centuries old, powerful beyond human comprehension, ruthless in ways you can't imagine. They've toppled kingdoms. They've orchestrated wars, and they want your son." She stood, crossing to him with measured steps. In the dim light from the street, she looked impossibly brave, small but unbreakable. "And you're what? A coward who's going to run after one blind date after one night of fighting for us. I'm trying to protect you by leaving." Her voice rose slightly, anger mixing with desperation. "Lucius, you saved my son's life tonight. You took a wound that could have killed you, that should have killed you to protect him. Don't you dare tell me you're leaving now because it's dangerous. You want to know what dangerous is?" She stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Dangerous is watching your child die and not being able to do anything about it. Dangerous is working 3 jobs and still not having enough for medicine. Dangerous is being alone in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. Dangerous is never taking the chance. So don't talk to me about danger. I've been drowning in it for years." He touched her face with trembling hands, memorizing the warmth of her skin, the slight roughness of her cheek where tears had dried. "I'm a monster. You're the monster who waited 47 minutes in the snow, who baked misshapen cookies, who read bedtime stories with more tenderness than I've ever seen. You're the monster who chose kindness over power, who gave up his own blood to save a child who isn't even his. He is mine! The Vampire King said fiercely, the words erupting from somewhere deep and primal. The moment I heard him laugh, he became mine. You both did, and that's why I have to stay. Elise interrupted, placing her hand over his heart. The heart that had just remembered how to beat for someone other than himself. You have to stay because running doesn't protect us. It just means we face the danger alone. And I've been alone long enough. I could get you killed. We could get you killed. Her voice softened. Jaime has vampire blood now. They'll hunt him regardless of whether you're here. At least with you, he has someone who understands what he's becoming. Someone who can teach him control. Someone who can show him that having power doesn't mean you have to be a monster. Lucius closed his eyes against the sting of tears he hadn't shed in 300 years. 3 centuries of running, of never letting anyone close enough to matter, of believing that loneliness was safer than love, that isolation was strength. And in one night, a blind date on Christmas Eve, a woman who smelled like hospitals and a boy with fever-bright eyes had shattered every defense he'd built. I don't know how to do this, he whispered, his voice breaking. How to be part of a family. How to stay when every instinct tells me to run. I've spent centuries being alone. I don't know if I remember how to be anything else. You start by not leaving tonight. She took his hand, guiding it to rest over hers against his chest. Then you don't leave tomorrow. Then you don't leave the day after that. You show up, Lucius, every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what love is, not the grand gestures, just showing up again and again. She pressed his hand against her heart, now letting him feel its steady rhythm. Mortal, temporary, precious beyond measure. Feel that. That's what you're fighting for. Not immortality, not power, not some distant kingdom in the shadows. This, us, right now. Lucius felt the beat of her heart against his palm, fragile, mortal, temporary, and suddenly that temporariness felt like the most precious thing in the world because it was real, it was now, it mattered. Stay, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Please. The Vampire King looked at Jaime, sleeping on the couch, peaceful for the first time in years. At the destroyed living room that somehow still felt like home. At this woman who'd chosen to trust a monster because she was brave enough to see beyond the fangs and red eyes. I'll stay, he said, and felt the words settle into his bones like an oath. For as long as you'll have me, for as long as you need me, for as long as I'm breathing or whatever it is I do. Good. She kissed him. Soft and certain, tasting of salt and coffee, and something that might have been hope because Jaime is going to need help figuring out his new abilities, and I'm going to need help fixing this apartment, and we're both going to need someone who knows how to fight ancient vampire councils. I do have some experience with that. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know. Margaret told me you're a king. Was a king. I abdicated 3 months ago. That's why the rebels are after me. They think I've betrayed our kind by questioning whether we have to be predators, whether we can choose to be something else, something better. And what did you choose? Lucius looked at her, really looked at her, at the exhaustion carved into the corners of her eyes, and the hope burning bright despite everything, at the strength it took to work herself to the bone for a child who wasn't hers biologically, but was hers in every way that mattered, at the courage to stand against supernatural monsters with nothing but a craft store, crucifix, and holy water. I chose this, he said simply, messy, complicated, mortal life. I chose showing up over running. I chose waiting 47 minutes in the snow on Christmas Eve and every minute after. I chose you. Elise smiled, and the vampire king felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 centuries finally crack open, letting warmth flood in. They spent the rest of the night on the couch, Hamey between them. Every so often Elise would check his forehead out of habit. Even though the fever was gone forever, every so often Lucius would scan the street for danger, his supernatural senses on high alert, but mostly they just sat there. 3 people who'd been alone, learning what it meant to be together. Learning that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice, about showing up, about deciding every single day that this person, this moment was worth fighting for. When dawn started to lighten the sky, painting the world in shades of pink and gold, Hamey stirred. "Is it Christmas?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Did Santa come?" Elise and Lucius exchanged glances. The living room was destroyed. The tree was broken. There were no presents under what remained of it, because she'd spent every penny on hospital bills that were now ironically obsolete. But Hamey sat up, looked at them both, and smiled. That gap-toothed smile that made everything worthwhile. "He did come. He brought me what I asked for." His eyes, now faintly red-tinged, sparkled with joy. "Someone to take care of Mom. Someone to teach me about being strong. A family." And Lucius, who'd spent 300 years believing he was incapable of crying, felt tears run down his face for the second time that night. Hamey wiped them away with small, careful fingers that were now stronger than they should be. "Mum says tears mean you're brave enough to feel things. Are you brave, Lucius?" "I'm trying to be," he whispered. "Good," Shiny said, suddenly serious, "because we're going to need brave for what comes next." The 7-year-old was right. The Vampire Council would come with greater force. The danger would escalate beyond anything they could imagine. The world would fight tooth and nail to tear them apart. But for now, on Christmas morning, in a broken apartment in the poor part of town, 3 people sat together and decided that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. They'd chosen each other. Now came the hard part, building a life worth protecting. 3 months passed like a held breath, fragile, precious, uncertain. The Vampire King moved into the small apartment officially, though he spent most nights watching the street from the window. The Vampire Council was silent. But silence didn't mean safety. It meant planning. He taught Hamey about his new abilities, how to control the strength that came with Dhampir blood, how to recognize other supernatural beings, how to walk in both worlds, mortal and immortal, without losing himself to either. Being powerful doesn't make you a monster, Lucius told him during one of their midnight training sessions. Choosing to hurt people makes you a monster. You get to choose who you are. Hamey absorbed everything with the seriousness of someone who'd looked death in the eye and survived. He still drew his elaborate pictures, still helped his mother with dinner, still laughed at cartoons on Saturday mornings. But now he could hear heartbeats from 3 rooms away, could see perfectly in the dark, could heal from injuries that would hospitalize a normal child. "It's scary sometimes," he admitted one night. "Being different." "I know," Lucius said, "but you're not alone in being different, and your mother loves you exactly as you are." "What about you?" The Vampire King pulled the boy close. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anything." The poor single mum found a better job, one that Margaret helped arrange with hours that actually let her see her son. She came home exhausted most nights, but it was a different kind of exhaustion, one that came from building instead of just surviving. And every night the Vampire King waited for her. Sometimes they cooked together, meals that Lucius had learned to enjoy even though he didn't need food. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence while Hamey did homework. Sometimes they talked deep into the night about the future, about the danger that was coming, about whether love was enough to weather what was ahead. "I used to think love was a luxury," Lucius said one night, Elise's head resting on his shoulder. "Something that made you weak, but I was wrong. Love is what makes you brave enough to fight. It's what gives you something worth protecting, even when it's terrifying, especially when it's terrifying. Margaret visited often, bringing groceries and gossip and occasional warnings about vampire council movements. She was delighted by the family they'd become, even as she worried about what the council would ultimately do. "They're not going to let this go," she warned Lucius privately. "A vampire king who chose mortals over power, a damper child with old blood. You've challenged everything they believe in." "Let them come," Lucius said. "I'm not running anymore." On a cold evening in March, Amy drew another picture. This time it showed 5 figures instead of 3. The woman, the boy, the Shadow King, and 2 new figures, one with Margaret's wild hair, another cloaked in darkness. "Who's that?" Elise asked, pointing to the shadowy figure. "I don't know yet," Amy said, "but they're going to help us when the bad ones come." That night, tucked into bed, Amy asked the question that had been building for months. "Are they going to try to take me away?" Elise looked at the Vampire King, then back at her son. "They're going to try, but we're not going to let them because we're a family." "Because we're a family," Lucius confirmed, "and families protect each other." Later, after Amy fell asleep, Lucius stood at his usual post by the window. The city sparkled below, thousands of lives unfolding in parallel, each one a small miracle of connection and hope. Elise joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your throne, your power, your immortal life as you knew it?" The Vampire King thought about the vampire councils he'd ruled, the centuries of loneliness, the endless parade of empty victories and hollow power. Then he thought about misshapen cookies and bedtime stories, about waiting 47 minutes in the snow on Christmas Eve, about a boy who called him family and a woman who'd chosen to see past the monster. "Not for a single second," he said. "Good." She kissed him softly. "Because I don't regret letting you wait. I don't regret showing up late and soaking wet and terrified on that blind date. I don't regret any of it, even the Vampire Council." "Even the Vampire Council, because you know what I learned. Danger is just another word for something worth protecting. And you too." Her voice broke slightly. "You're worth every terrifying moment." They stood together as the city slept. 3 people who'd been broken learning to be whole. The danger would come. The council would strike. The future was uncertain and terrifying and completely unknown. But they would face it together. And that made all the difference. This was more than survival. This was choosing hope every single day, even when darkness threatened to consume everything.